I would like a raise of hands as to how many of you have read a history book from beginning to end over the last couple of years. I would say I count about 15. That's probably about 10%. This is a history book that I had in my basement. I haven't read it. It's been sitting there for about 10 years, and I never read it myself. Here I have a movie. It's a movie with a historical context. There are hundreds of these. This is Zulu for colonialism. There are many like Spartacus for Rome, or Agora that came out last year, Pearl Harbor, World War II. There are many. So I'm wondering if I can have a raise of hands as to how many of you have actually watched a movie with any historical context over the last couple of years. That's almost all of you. And that's because watching movies is fun. It's entertaining, captivating, and it takes you through an experience. So a friend of mine and I were a bit geeky, and we actually watched 223 movies over a span of about 2 years to realize what is that catalog of history movies that there are. And we came up with some conclusions. First, we probably should get a girlfriend. That's probably one of the first conclusions, or get a proper life. But here are some of the images of certain movies from different time periods. There we go. So one of the conclusions that we came up with, which is pretty obvious, is most historically key context movies come from the United States. And that's because they are big budgets. They're very hard to do. You need costumes, you need scenarios, and it's expensive. There are movies, for example, for the World War II, also from France or from Spain, from Germany, from Sweden. But it begs a question. For example, in World War II, how many movies have we had a chance to look at that were not made by the Allies, or the ones that won? How many movies have we watched from the Nazism regime? And that's only for this period, but imagine all the other periods that there are of movies. What we also wanted to do is we wanted to put in perspective a timeline, and we studied from Rome to World War II and put it in a sort of a timeline to try to figure out what movies have been watched more than others. And we realize, or what movies have been produced more than others. We realize there's a lot of movies of World War II, like I mentioned, but also of the formation of the United States. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of Westerns. And it's also interesting to note from this is that if you look at the relevant size of time of Rome and Middle Ages, although we think there are a lot of movies, but relatively to the amount of time there are very few movies out there. Why? Because producers want to be able to make movies that entail a character that people recognize, or entail a conflict period, but we don't hear the whole story. So this brings me to history and how it affects us for the next 10 years by understanding history. Well, today, one of the things that I heard across the board in all presentations was mentioning of history to know what our progress is. We heard about food, we heard about technology, we heard about architecture. So over the next 10 years, trends of the timeline of history that has happened so far could repeat themselves. A great empire like the United States or a great empire like Google may fall. Or a social network such as the revolution we have now of Facebook and the such. Is it anyway near close to this social upheaval that happened in France that created the French Revolution? Or maybe over the next 10 years, we'll discover a new civilization that will change the world for the next 500 years, maybe outside of space or in space, like much happened after the discovery of America. These are some of the questions that are a bit high level, but more closer to home is the evolution of how history is represented to us and given to us. It went from books to movies, and now we have YouTube, we have snippets of YouTube, snippets of movies, and what we also have is the ability to create movies that's cheaper and cheaper to distribute as well. So we may have access to other periods we didn't have before. We also have access to things like the iPad and other devices that put together media such as movies, pictures, books, literature. So what I think over the next 10 years is we're going to have more access to it. And I hope that we are going to be able to create contexts so that all of us can study history a little bit more. And with that, hopefully, like we heard today, we'll have promise and we'll have a better future by learning from the past. Thank you.